Hi, Debbie here, and thank you for joining me as I chat about how I like to get a loosely watercoloured floral arrangement from stamps. There is a wide range of different techniques for watercolouring flowers, from the very loosest of simple brush marks to ultra-detailed realistic paintings. My preference is for somewhere in between, but more towards the loose side. It's a play between faded hints at what is there and yet other areas where you can still define flowers and leaves, and they do have some detail to them. For my card, I use the Magnolia Cottage stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. It does have a matching die, but I'll just be using the stamp today. I like the line of the jug and also the freedom to add flowers and leaves as I wanted. I used Archer's cold press watercolour card and took a piece that fit into the mini Misti. I'll be cutting this down later, but for now I wanted a bit of room for freedom and to not have to worry too much about placement. Initially, I created a plan by laying the stamps onto the card, one on top of the other. From this, I worked out that I wanted the biggest bloom front and centre and in front of all the other elements. You could create masks for each of the stamps, but I simply wiped away ink where it would overlap with images already stamped. For example, I stamped the large bloom first and then the jug, and for the rim of the jug, I wiped away the ink so that it didn't overlap the flower. Now, I didn't do a perfect job, but I'll be painting over all of this, and the ink I used, which is Antique Linen Distress ink, is one which is light in colour and also, being water-based, blends well with the paints to leave a no-line watercoloured look. With my arrangement stamped out, I made sure to have a jug of clean clear water and then mixed up my colours. I always like to start a painting with the leaves. For me, they are easier to paint, and so I get my hand in before attempting the flowers. Also, having the leaves in place grounds the arrangement and creates a base for the flowers. It's almost like creating a structure, a framework on which to work on. I mixed up a range of hues on my palette, but the base colour was Perylene Green. All the paints I used are from Daniel Smith. With the delicate images in mind, I used two small size 2 brushes and even a smaller brush for the leaf stems and details. I often use 2 brushes at the same time, one loaded with paint and one with clean clear water. This way I can paint a line with the loaded brush where I expect the shadows to be, and then pull the colour out with the water brush. This way you get a range from the deeper shadows to the lighter highlights. As you saw from my palette, I like to mix colours and don't stick to just a pure colour from the tube. However, for this card, the key colours were Perylene Green for the leaves, Pigment Genuine for the flowers, and Transparent Red Oxide for the jug. Initially, I started the jug with a lighter base of buff titanium, but eventually I brought in deeper hues for richness. I'm still very much loving the warm shades of terracotta, muted pinks and bluey greens. I'll play some music now and let you enjoy the watercolouring. I appreciate the feedback from a previous video where I asked what speed people like to see the painting, and many people asked for more of the watercolouring and a mix of slow and fast so that you can see the detail of the painting process in places, but that the video isn't too long also. With a base layer of watercolouring down, this is where I like to loosen things up. So far I've mainly been sticking to the stamped outlines, which gives a framework, but from here a few small adjustments, just touches here and there, make all the difference. I used a watery green mix to fill in with a few leaves. Being light in colour, these will fill out the arrangement, but as they fade into almost nothing, they give that ethereal feel. To prevent the jug from floating in mid-air, I created a ground by adding clean clear water beneath the jug and then bringing in paint. This wet in wet technique is amazing to watch as the colour seeps and bleeds through the water. I brought in purpley greys for the shadows and then a touch of Pigment type genuine to bring in the colour from the flowers. This is a granulating paint, and when used in this wet in wet way, you can really see the pigment settle and give that textured look. I also added a loose wash of muted blue around the flowers. I didn't worry about getting right to the edges, in fact often left a border around the flowers. I've seen this technique in graphic design pieces and quite like it, so I thought I'd try it out here. It is often a good idea to step back and assess whether you have sufficient contrast. Are there areas of light, mid-tone and dark shadow? I felt I needed to deepen the shadows more and so brought in stronger concentrations of paint in some areas. Just pops of darker areas here and there. You don't want everything to be all the same tone or your watercolour will look flat and lacking life. My next tip for how to loosen things up is splatter. I like splatter and I like a lot of it. Initially I started with white gouache and this gives opaque white spots when splattered. I then splattered with a little leftover green paint and liked how the paint hit the white gouache and spread out and gave lighter areas of colour. To emphasise this, I splattered over the top with water, and this gave puddles of colour, and their random placement and shape were a perfect way to loosen things up. I finished off with a splatter of perfect pearls because you can never have too much sparkle. I added a few dots of white gouache to the flower centres and again added more shadows with concentrated paint. I trimmed the panel to be smaller than an A2 card base and then used foam tape to add to the base cut and scored from fog card. I still couldn't resist fiddling. I wouldn't recommend fiddling when watercolouring as a rule, but equally I don't see the harm in going in and adding more contrast. I wanted a simple birthday greeting for this card so that I could give it to a friend for her birthday. I chose the Sentiment Strips Reverse Birthday from CZ Design, which gives a multitude of options. I chose the simplest from the set and used a scalpel and ruler to cut it out before adding it to the card with more foam tape. I used a T-square ruler to help me align it on straight. I think a few subtle embellishments also adds to the loose look. It gives the eye something else to concentrate on. I added a few pink enamel dots from Hero Arts and a sprinkling of eggshell pearls from Little Things from Lucy's cards, which I kept in place with Gina K Connect glue and the aid of a Marvy jewel picker. I still couldn't leave things alone and so added a stronger shadow with a Faber-Castell pencil before finally calling it done. So there you go, my hints and tips as to how to loosely watercolour stamped images. I'll leave links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used today, as well as a coordinating link to the blog post over at limebeautydesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you subscribe to this channel. And before I go, here's a couple of videos I think you also might like. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.